do this talk. I had the invitation a little while ago when I actually ran into a Kenyatta College student at the Society of Women Engineers conference, and we reconnected. As you may know, I'm actually a Kenyatta College alum. So I'm very happy and proud to be a community college successful story. And I hope to, this is my trip back here after maybe 12 years. I haven't been in the area. So I'm very happy. When I got the invitation, I thought, yes, no matter what I do in my schedule, because I'm always moving, I have to make it. I have to make it and reconnect. So I have a special place in my heart for transfer students because I was one, and because I know they have special needs, special timing considerations as you move forward, and you come with lots of great experiences and skills, and I think that hopefully my story and some suggestions and any time, I'm going to hang out around a little bit if you want to talk to me in person, I will stick around because I really want to hear from you as well. So thank you for the invitation again. My name is Lilian Davila. I'll give you a little bit of background about me. So I'm an immigrant from South America, from Peru. When I moved to the States, I actually came to Kenyatta College to take English as a second language. So this is a very important institution for me, both at the cultural transitional stage in my adapting to a new country, but also as preparing towards university career, academic career in general. So Kenyatta College was very pivotal in my life, both as a student and also as person, because I met people from all walks of life, many different cultures, many different ages, different experiences. A lot of people who were coming back to do a second career, retired people. To me, that was a joy, really, because very few places you can go and meet so many diverse viewpoints, truly diverse viewpoints. So I took it to English as a second language, and then I was preparing for a career as computer science and engineering major. And I took the Introduction to Material Science course. How many of you have taken that? Generally it's a core class for most engineering. Can you raise your hand? How many of you have taken the equivalent to E45 or Introduction to Material Science? Okay, with more confidence, come on.
Material Science now.
Okay. Okay. So, Introduction to Material Science, or very similar title in different places, is a very interesting class because, as you know, material science and engineering is very interdisciplinary. Right? It serves as a core class for many engineering classes. And whether you end up going towards the science end of it or more engineering side of it, you have a lot of range of possibilities. Just like bioengineers are very interdisciplinary in nature, actually material scientists are similarly very interdisciplinary. Okay, so I came to Kenyatta College. I was taking my first computer science and engineering courses. It was programming and all that, but I met a wonderful mentor, Professor Miller. I can't remember his first name, unfortunately. But you all know probably the legacy of Professor Miller. Professor Miller was an outstanding scholar, mentor, advisor, and friend. He actually graduated from Stanford, had a PhD. I think he had 2 PhDs from what I recall. And to me, his dedication for education, he cares so much about bringing up people towards the science and engineering disciplines, not just getting a degree, right? He cared about the people. And I started working in the computer lab here as an assistant. To me, it was great because I was practicing English, I was coding, getting to know more people. I was very social, so I had no problems meeting people, but it was a good first experience. I met a lot of people from different backgrounds. I had really amazing experiences just having time to spend with different types of people, from retirees all the way to first-year students, high school students, and the like. So that experience, by the way, Professor Miller was the principal investigator in charge of the computer lab. He was a material science engineering instructor, but also he was in charge of computer science resources on campus here. Long story short, I took introduction to the material science, and I learned how to use computational sources to study materials, right? And he taught the class, and I was the only girl in the class at that time. It was a few years ago, but not so long. Majority, those classes are not, represented. Maybe an average of 12% or 20%. The classes are women. So the point that I'm trying to get is, here is someone who came, who's learning the language, was preparing for a career in computer science and engineering, took a class outside her main core, because it was one of those classes, a requirement course, but it was not a computer science per se. I embraced the challenges that came along with the responsibility of running a computer lab with someone, working in teams and the like. And Professor Miller did something wonderful to me, which I will always thank him for. He put me on the spot every single time that there was a lab. So he will split the lab. He will say, okay, half of the lab goes with Lilian over there, and the other half is going to come here, and we're going to run these experiments. And I had never seen any instructions. We never talked about it, and I was scared to death. I was the only girl, I still have an accent, but hopefully people can understand me better than them. And the point being that Professor Miller always challenged me and always put me on the spot to test me, to make me a better person and a better student. And I used to even come late to the class on purpose, because I didn't want to be in charge of any group, using the instrument machine that I've never tested, I've never seen in my life. I had to follow instructions on the spot with a handout. And I'm supposed to look like I know what I'm doing. That could be very intimidating, as you can imagine, in that environment. Well, I decided I'm going to talk to Professor Miller and say, well, why are you picking on me, right? I'm just barely learning English. You can't expect me to do all this stuff on the spot without telling me in advance. And we had a long talk, but in the end he says, embrace challenges. Something good always comes out of that. If you make it a point to learn something good for you, then you will benefit more than anybody. If you have to fake it, that you're not stressed or nervous, learn how to fake it. And I used to look at him like, why are you doing that to me? Why not pick up anybody else? But over the years, I have always remembered his words, and I always try to convey that to my students and say, be sure to, while you prepare on the academic side, and while you're having fun, because you're a young person, try to experience life, the real life, not just virtual life. While you're doing that, also try to embrace challenges. Seek challenges. If you're in your comfort zone, you will never advance as well as you could when you meet a challenge. And there are degrees of challenges, right? Identify, follow your gut feeling, talk to people and say, I'm not sure if I'm ready for this, but I want to try this. And I would say, if it doesn't require you jumping off a cliff, then every challenge that you can meet along the way could be very, very beneficial to you, right? So that's my message. No matter what you do, where you go, what field, subfield, your situation, you have kids, not kids, you retire, whatever, always try to remember those three things. Prepare yourself academically, have fun, right? And embrace challenges so that you can take something away for your future. And most importantly, because you want to, as you prepare for the next stage of your life, you want to stand up, not just academically, you want to stand up for someone who, you know, we see many applications, right? And we see trends. And when we see people that are unique, that they know how to communicate that in their applications, and when we meet them in person because we have lab tours or interviews or whatever, when people know who they are and how unique they are, that speaks volumes. And even in cases when the students don't have the minimum requirement of a GPA, we're willing to make the exception because we're looking for exceptional individuals. Right? So many times I have turned down students with a 4.0 because frankly I meet them and it's like, I don't want this kid in my lab because it's not going to be a team player. It's not all about academics. It's not. No matter what you do. And yes, you should work on academics. I'm not saying relax. Do the best you can. But be sure to have the other skills that are important. People spend thousands of dollars, industry spends millions of dollars to have people who are professional, young professionals be problem solvers as well as team players. And believe me, it's easier to teach technical skills to people that don't have them than having to teach basic skills to people who are solidly good in technical skills. It's a pain, so people don't want it, right? So be sure you're not a 4.0 only. If you're a 4.0 and you're well-rounded, great for you. But try to balance those things because I see more and more that disparity, and frankly, community college students in general do very well. So try to reach out and meet faculty in advance, offer to come and meet, do a tour, ask for a lab tour, ask to meet grad students and talk to the students of that group. See if you fit, if you see yourself in that group. We're open, especially young universities like UC Merced, we're open. We just don't have time to reach out. But if you come prepared, you make a 15-minute presentation or interview or meeting, you can have the tour and the time to talk to our students and find out what is our style of work and opportunities and the like. And you can make other faculty as well. And that's the same kind of thing you should do in any university you should go. Whether it's close by and you can do a physical visit or you can do a Skype interview or a phone or email. You know, nowadays there's many tools. You have to be proactive to interview the faculty in advance because it's a commitment of your time and my time, for example, right? So try to be proactive when you're looking, especially for community college students. You don't have too much time once you transfer to get involved in research, in any other professional development activity that you make. In fact, I have a couple of students who are like desperately looking for research. And so I do understand that, but if you can reach out a year in advance, a summer in advance, you transfer. That's even better. Okay? So I'll entertain questions at the end and stop me whenever I present something that you want to get clarification. Anyways, briefly, once I graduated from Kenyatta College, and by the way, I fell in love with material science, and then I thought, well, I could use computational tools to study materials. And so I transferred to UC Davis, where I got my master's. And I wasn't quite sure if I was going to go towards PhD, to be honest. I had other goals. But I always challenged myself to do extra things to experience whether that was for me or not. I ended up applying for a PhD and with the goal of being a faculty. And you can pursue other venues with a PhD, right? You can work for the federal government, for industry, etc. As a consultant or have your startup, whatever. The point being is, graduated with a PhD and I then became a postdoc. I took a pause of 6 months because I wanted to know exactly what research institution I was going to go into. And I worked in the College of Engineering for 6 months before pursuing a postdoc position. So I got 2 very prestigious postdocs, one from Livermore National Lab, and then the other one with UC President's, so it's the University of California President's Postdoctoral Fellowship. Then I got an additional postdoc with Ford Foundation. So that's a nationwide, very, very difficult to get. It's like 3% success rate. So those experiences were preparing me to become independent in the research, to prepare activities for teaching, for outreach, because professors are evaluated in research, teaching, and outreach service. So I was actually doing those things ahead of everybody else because I didn't want to start day one as a faculty and sort of navigating, not know what exactly that meant. I did that and it was worthwhile. So that's my story. But my story is just one example of possibilities, right? So you have to create your own story. And the best way to get your story to be unique and to be yours is to prepare yourself, reach out, be proactive, and take challenges, embracing challenges. Don't be afraid to seek out mentors. You should have more mentors than just 1 or 2, because you're going to need more mentors along the way. It's getting more and more competitive every single, cycle. I just graduated my first cohort, and I'm taking a little break, and I think, wow, the undergrads go through so much information bombardment. And there's a lot of great programs that can help you, but you need to step up and be more proactive and plan and organize, manage your time, manage your stress, manage your energy. And it's a balancing act, because you want to have a life and you want to be a good student. Anyways, so that's my story. All I say at the end of the day, you have to be the happiest person doing what you want to do. In engineering, it's not very common that you hear professors talk about happiness, right? So my goal is to make sure students are prepared for the next generation, the current problems and beyond, well-rounded working teams, but also happy individuals. Because nobody benefits from having students graduating and being, not as effective as they could be. So my goal, my individual goal, is to make sure my students are well-rounded professionals that are happy and that contribute to society. And that's a big mission in my life. In my first cohort, I can say all of them are wonderful people that are better than what I intended to do, because they are exactly that kind of individuals. So I'm very proud of them, and hopefully, that this will translate to you as well. Hopefully, that's something that you would value. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about research. So now you know that I combine my computational science background with material science and engineering. And this happens because of specifically an experiment that we ran in Introduction to Material Science. How many of you have used the instrument machine to pull? Yes, a few? Okay, so this is a machine that pulls materials apart. And you have connected a data acquisition system, and then you can analyze on spot the curves, often things like load versus displacement, and you can convert them into stress versus strain, and then you can measure from those curves mechanical properties of materials. So you can compare the toughness, the tensile strength, the stiffness, and so all these key properties of different materials. And you can compare why a polymer is one way and the metal is another way. And so I fell in love with that particular test. That's my turning point. Why? Because I didn't want to code in the basement of a building. I'm too social, too extrovert, and I thought, I don't want to be coding. I know I am very good at coding, but I don't want to be coding 2,000 or 3,000 lines in the basement of a lab. I want to apply the tools to analyze materials. So that experiment itself was wonderful. The second interesting component, which I always say is true, okay, I'm not just saying this to impress or whatever. As a female student, I have never had the experience of breaking things. So something destructive in a controlled way was very, very fun. I remember when I was a girl, I used to just follow my cousins because they used to do more fun things, going to fish and jump in the river, play with cars. I play with dolls too, but I didn't want to be sedentary. So maybe because of that, when I saw those tests and we were breaking materials in the lab and then immediately analyzing their properties and then getting microscopic images of those slides, fractured surfaces. Maybe it wasn't that big of a deal maybe for other people, but to me it was like, wow, I can actually use computers to analyze data, and I can break stuff within a reason and understand why materials are the way they are. So that lab itself just changed my whole game, and I thought, I want to do computational material science. At that time, there was not such a field per se, so if you look for a discipline of that source, it wasn't in the books, it wasn't in the catalog of courses, etc. And there are yet many faculty, many researchers who use computational tools to analyze and maybe compare or validate their simulations with experiments. But at that stage, I figured there's something here that is unique. I should combine the best of both worlds. So today I'll just briefly introduce you about the young field of computational material science. And we're using different tools, we have different projects that basically we are scaling up, we're addressing different length scales and time scales. And the whole goal is to actually advance materials by design. And what that means is we're actually not just simulating properties or behavior of materials, we're actually using experiments to validate, to explore regimes that are not measurable. And then we're using 3D printing, prototyping, to predict and to create. So basically, simulations are predicting behavior, and we are creating prototypes of what we expect to be optimal geometries. And with prototyping, now you can use lithography techniques, right? You can use atomic layer deposition and many others, and create actual materials. So, unlike what most people foresee as computer simulations just being sitting down passively and running simulations forever, maybe they are meaningful, maybe they're not. We're actually using a combination of those three methods to create actual samples that we can test with other collaborators. So this is actually very exciting, and I'm very excited to share this, especially with Kenyatta College students. You're like the third group that I present this. So this is very, very new. So I'm just going to briefly go through some of these. I'm sorry, I'm just tripping over. So the current research, I've been in UC Merced for 6 years now, and we've established a very nice computational lab, bring up a whole cohort of students who graduated, PhDs and masters, postdocs, research assistants, and basically establish the lab from the grounds up. The current research is basically focused on bio-inspired materials, and I put there multi-scale mechanics of bio-inspired materials, and I'll talk to you about what that means. The other research track that I have is mechanical behavior and structure of nanomaterials, in nanostructures, specifically in glass nanostructures. And the third research area is focused on structural properties of three-dimensional microarchitectures. So these are fundamentally metamaterials that we're working on. So this is just my 2 cents about who we are, the type of research interest. I'll be happy to share some of that. But essentially what I want to highlight here is we're using both computational, experimental, and other computational resources like scientific visualization, virtual reality for some of our projects. And so this is the product of roughly 10 years in the development, as you can imagine. Everything started with a PhD, right? So I'm building on those PhD and then opening up different research tracks from there. So what is computational material science? Well, it's a research area that facilitates the communication between experimentalist and computational investigation, right? So the whole goal is to study existing and new advanced materials, their properties and their applications. Material science and engineering focuses on fundamental pillars. One of being you understand the structure of a material, then you can infer or assess the property of that material, because there's a direct relation, and then you can explore the potential applications of that based on performance of the material, right? Well, over the years, these 4 pillars, the structure, properties, applications, performance, was enhanced with computational tools as a way to accomplish all that. So computational material science is a very interdisciplinary research that uses computational approaches, methods, or tools. We want to study and predict, so we want to understand the current existing material, but we want to predict behavior that we cannot easily measure. For example, you want to maybe study extreme conditions under which a material is being used. Okay? So for that, you most of the time are going to be dealing with concepts in materials, engineering, physics, chemistry, and computer science. So the whole goal is to study structure, property, performance, applications in general, but the whole goal is you can, in the future, design. So this is a very useful map or computational mapping, a roadmap of the kind of computational resources that are available to scientists. Depending on the time scale, on your y-axis you see the time scale, and on the x-axis you see the distance, the length scale. So depending on the length scale that you're talking about or the time scale, then you would use an appropriate computational method. Things like quantum mechanics, right? You probably have heard, or ab initio, are typically used to study the behavior of electrons in a material. So then you can study things like optical properties and the like. Then you have things like molecular dynamics and mesoscale and many others, including finite element in that big bubble, bubble, I call it bubble. And then more recently, people are actually trying multi-scale approaches, which means you connect some of these from quantum all the way to finite element, but you could also, as long as you cover 2 or 3 length scales, you could do any combinations. You could combine molecular dynamics, mesoscale, and finite. The point is that you could have more and more complex computing resource intensive research done depending on the phenomena that you're studying and also the resources that you have, right? Not everybody can do multi-scale on a laptop, right? So you usually use things like supercomputers in either national labs, which I had the pleasure of have very, very abundant and unlimited number of resources to me while I was a postdoc in Livermore National Lab. And so, so there are many trends in the future in which you combine these different length scales so you can study the phenomena at the nanoscale in applied and try to see how that affects the larger scale, the micro scale or so. And then in this particular talk, I'm gonna present some of the efforts we are doing on using finite element analysis. And we can study structure and properties, and we can compare and validate our simulations with SEM, scanning electron microscopy, or even mechanical testing and the like. So the first research track I was talking about is the so-called bio-inspired research, right, materials. So the bio-inspired thing comes with the goal of adopting a structure that is from nature, that has developed over thousands of years, and trying to understand why the properties of that material is the way it is, and how we can adapt these to new materials that we are creating, right, that we're designing, that we can test. So how many have heard about diatoms, by the way? Raise your hand. Okay, good. Diatoms are algae, are wonderful, wonderful biostructures that there's roughly over 100,000 of species in the water environment, either sea or river, fresh water, etc. On the left side you see a collage of color-coded, actually, diatoms. They have, most of them, they come either as a circular shape or elongated shape. And there are some other that are very, very complicated because they have either the shape of stars and the like. But most of the time, diatoms have been studied by biologists or environmental research scientists. In the last 20 years, engineers have been looking at the structure of diatoms very closely because they have three specific characteristics. First, they're made of biosilica, right? So it's a glassy structure, but the overall dimension, whether it's the diameter or the length overall of the structure, is actually in the micron length scale. Okay, but it has very well-ordered pores that run from nanometers all the way to a few microns. And why is this important is because nanotechnologies are trying to create, fabricate, synthesize different types of templates that you can control the pore distribution so that you can do fun things. You can apply, you can put quantum dots, you can create photonic devices and the like. Well, you know, there's limitations on those fabrications. You can't do too many of them or the bulk. You can't control the pores that well. So people start looking at this in that light. How can we replicate and what can we learn from these structures that we can adapt to new materials? Okay. So some of the examples of other shapes of these typical diatoms are included there. So the potential applications range, you know, and these are like potential applications, right? Nobody has yet been able to create anything like a prototype of any kind that is meaningful enough. But people who are experts in diatoms or nanotechnology and the like have proposed diatom structures or diatoms-like structures could be very useful as drug delivery systems, photonic devices, like I said, and solar energy collectors, among other things, including nanotemplates. You can imagine if you control the size of the pores. You can deposit materials of given type and then combine and create layers of them. So one additional complication is the diatoms. Actually, when you looked at them very closely with SEM, scanning electron microscopy, this is another example of a circular diatom that has like a cross-like feature in the middle. But the point being there is that the circular diatoms are actually, and that's a top view, but just as a clarification, that the circular diatom is made of two parts, two valves. The top valve and the bottom valve, and they fit together just like a petri dish. Okay? So imagine if you remember your time in the lab last time. So they fit very well. And one of the valves, if you look at cross-sectional area, they're not made of a single layer of porous glass. It's actually a hierarchical layer made of three specific layers with distinct size of pores in a hexagonal configuration. And so the question has been, so far, people have studied diatoms from different aspects, mostly, like I said, mostly from biology perspectives and environmental considerations. But some mechanical tests were done on these structures that were basically compressed uniaxially with a glass needle. That was the first type of test. The bottom line is these structures are soft even though they're made of glass. And because they're hierarchical structure, they behave in a unique way. They're not just a glassy soft, it's actually a soft material. It's strong, it's very tough, and it doesn't break easily. Okay, so the mechanical properties of these biological structures are inherently connected to the material, but most importantly, their hierarchical structure. And we don't know enough of why the young modulus and this, hardness of these materials are the way they are. Why are they significantly different from the parent material? Okay? So, you can imagine doing tests like this is very complicated, right? Some people have luckily proceeded some efforts which have helped experimentalists. So we study and predict the mechanical behavior of bioinspired hierarchical structures inspired by the diatoms. And we're trying to understand the role of the hierarchical layers on the properties so that we can pursue material by design. So I'm going to kind of jump a little bit ahead because I have 5 minutes. So this is a slide just talking about, what I said. Initially, what we studied was we use ambient nanoindentation and finite element simulations to study very systematically the mechanical properties of a few species, and then we validated our simulations and we predicted behavior that is not readily available to measure in the lab. So this is an example of some of the load versus displacement that we obtained for one species of the circular type called cosinodiscus. We found very soon that the diameter of first of all, the sample preparation and the testing are very, very challenging, very tedious. And even within the species, you have a high variation of results. The frazzle or the diatom diameter ranges from 40 microns all the way to 300 microns. And most people they assume that the Young modulus is not affected by the diameter, but we have found otherwise. So once we obtain Young modulus for this test, we actually validated nano indentations that would proceed in the computer, because the simulations have to be meaningful, right? And then we proceeded conducting compression simulations using finite elements to mimic the real displacement and von Mises distribution of the real diatom on the left side. And then we changed the pore sizes to different sizes just to see how that has an effect on the von Mises distribution and the like. So we did that very systematically and found certain trends that were very unique that basically allowed us to study the properties, the effect of porosity and diameter of these pores, for example, on different properties. And this behavior is very, very different from the elongated type. I didn't include that, but if you're interested, we published a paper recently so you can get all that information. So this was the first study where it shows that we can actually combine experiment simulations to predict and hopefully go into more of the design. And how do we go into the design world? It was only possible because of 3D printing. Okay? Most of the other techniques are available today. People say, oh, you have to wait another 5 years, maybe 10 years before things become real at that scale. Well, I don't want to wait 5 to 10 years to start looking for other things that may help. And so we found 3D printing. As you know, 3D printing is very widely available. But we wanted high-resolution 3D printing of micron size resolution, right? That's not very common. So we've actually found a nanoscribe machine which costs about $500,000. We don't have that machine, but we have collaborators who have them. And so we're studying this again, the cross-sectional view of the cosinodiscus, and we're pursuing simulations to study the hierarchical effect on the properties of these. So I'm going to skip very quickly just to show you some. We recently created CAD models that have these resolutions for that particular, and that the structure, the hierarchical structure for this type of diatom. And guess what? We actually pursued the 3D printing. So these are the first microscopy images of these 9 prototypes that we obtained, and these are the SEM pictures that show that you can not only reproduce diatom-inspired structures, but the real one-to-one scale diatoms, but we can actually have any combinations of porosity and even shapes to create these prototypes. These prototypes are going to then go into atomic layer deposition, and they're of different materials, and we're going to be able to then have another group in Caltech do nanomechanical tests. Okay? So the main messages here is that computational material science help you to study and explore regimes that are not fully accessible in the lab. So that could be an asset to anyone doing simulation research in general. And the finite element simulations allow study of broad length scales and pursue materials design. And the most important message that I want to convey to you is that be aware that the integration of different methods is going to be a very important milestone. And if you prepare towards combining or be prepared learning a little bit of both, you're going to be in a better position, because the National Science Foundation, for example, created a materials genomic initiative, which they expect to have thousands of jobs, especially for people that can reduce the time and advance material research by combining or integrating different methods. So not just experiments are enough, and not just simulations, but a combination of both. Thank you for your attention.